All right, everybody. I'm super happy to be here with the amazing Andra Day, Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, actress, activist, artist. It's nuts. Everybody has heard the song "Rise Up," "Stand Up" or something. You got an Oscar-nominated collaboration with Common on that. Got a new release, "Make Your Troubles Go Away." I am so glad that you're here because we need you. We need your voice. You're like medicine. Your voice is like medicine. Your songs are like medicine. And, it's been a very, very challenging period, I think, here. And I just wonder, how do you feel about everything that's going on, and how are you using your platform to try to make a difference and lift us up?
First starting with how I feel about everything that's going on, you know, I think everybody wants me to feel like this is so tragic. What happened to George Floyd is tragic, and what happens to us every day is tragic. But the protests, and I do separate us from the riots, which is another conversation. The protests are the inevitable. You know what I mean? It's just people can't live like this every day with people being suspicious of them every single day, with them always being looked at as dangerous, as a problem, as a menace, as lazy, literally because of a false narrative that was spun, a century ago. You have to deal with these things every day, and, eventually it boils over. Like anyone in any aspect of life, when you've been dealing with something for so long, eventually you have to get it out. And so to me, these are difficult and challenging times, but for me, they're also exciting times. I think we're seeing people come together in ways, though we've marched before, though we've protested before. I think we're seeing people come together and speak about certain things, in ways that are unprecedented, that we haven't seen before, and I think, I have this on me right now, but I think a part of it is, it can be a blessing, but I think a part of it is also these things, the fact that we can actually record and see these things on video. We know as a community they've been happening, and it doesn't take that much to go look at, documents, FBI documents from the past, to see that, we've had people infiltrating our protests and our movements for, a generation already, but we couldn't record them. And now we can, and so to me, yes, it is a lot, but it's also really promising, honestly. And if that's the right thing to say or not, I don't really know, but to me, it feels like
look, to tell your truth, I do think that, the way that our movements are sometimes targeted, infiltrated, diverted, disrupted, to then become disruptive to our own narrative. But, you have somehow been able to produce and to provide music that always brings people back to their best selves. You create anthems. They ain't songs. Talk about that. Where do you go? How do you find in yourself this beauty that you're able to share with the world? What's that process? Because the world is rough, and but your music is really is medicine.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate that. Thank you. But it's a pretty simple answer. I think people sometimes want it to be more complex than it is. But to me, my unction to do that really comes from my faith. I just feel like I've just been blessed with so much, from family to a community, that loves and that supports me. And, I don't know, it just doesn't, I can't, sometimes I want to, you know what I mean? Sometimes I want to just not think about it and turn my mind off. But it's like, as soon as I try to do that, it's like something festering, and it, you can't turn a blind eye. I go through it, and I don't want my kids growing up in a world where they feel like every time they're in a room with white people, or that they have to prove that they're worthy to be there, that they have to make sure that people don't feel like they're dangerous or be suspicious of them. So, I make it because people need encouragement, you know what I mean? And they need hope. And I think we forget, sometimes we can discount art as just as sort of a fringe thing. But the reality is, it started revolutions in other countries. You know what I'm saying? I read about this band that I love called Tinariwen from Mali. You know what I mean? And their music started a revolution in that country. And so I think we forget how powerful and how important it is to be to inspire people. And I always take it back to this scripture that I read one time where it was a prophet Elijah there was a village, I guess the waters were sick. I'm probably not quoting it exactly right, but check my homework. But and one of the first things he said when they called him to come heal the waters was to bring me someone to play the lyre, to play the harp. You know what I mean? Before he could actually heal it. And that really stuck with me. Like I think it was really designed to be healing. And I think if we lose that aspect in music, then that's a big chunk that we're missing in the world. You know what I mean? So
you seem somehow to still be full of hope. So many people are not. I guess the last time I felt hope was around like Barack Obama in 2008. That was like, I was like a big hope and changer. You got a chance to perform at the White House for Obama. You got a chance to sing at the 2016 Democratic Convention. How do you see the 2020 election? Do you feel the same sense of hope you did in 2008? Do you feel more discouraged? I mean, it's a different time now. How do you feel about it?
Yeah. It's definitely a different time. In a lot of ways, I see us. Listen, I stay hopeful because I have to. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think hope and being encouraged, I always think of like peace and joy that surpass understanding and circumstance. You know what I mean? Like, I gotta be hopeful, even if the landscape doesn't give me anything to be hopeful for. You know what I'm saying? That you have to just like, and sometimes the hope just comes from us, you know what I mean? Or internally, it's like, all right, well, I can still hope because, the micro affects the macro. I can make a difference in my family, with my friends, in my community, at the strangers that I encounter. You have that power too. And it's a cell network, you know what I mean? And the more that we do that, then the more we'll start to see it impact the macro. And I feel like that for me is also a thing that allows me to maintain hope and to sustain hope. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I think we get so discouraged with the big picture. We see who's in office. We see this really violent and racially charged rhetoric. It's intentional, these things. And so I feel like you can feel drowned in that. I tell people it's like being in a room screaming for help. You're locked in this room, but everybody else is telling everyone on the outside that you're somewhere else and you're okay. So I think we can forget how much power we have as individuals when we're in the midst of something that feels so big and feels so overwhelming. And so, my faith gives me hope, the power that we have as individuals. When I see us coming together as a community, we have hope.
You talked about that cell network, that, and the micro affecting the macro. Allyship now, I think, is really on the table. I think for a lot of white folks, well-intentioned.
Yeah.
Even if anti-racism was on their list of stuff that they cared about, it was like number 17, number 12, maybe number 4,
That big a deal. We're far removed from slavery now,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, I tell people all the time, I'm a 9th generation American and I'm the first person in my family born with all my rights. So It wasn't that long ago. I was born in 68. So I'm a 9th generation American, first one in my family born with all my rights. And so, but now I think that you probably have 20, 30, 50 million white Americans who would say, look, I would have to put this near the top of my list. What can I do? Blah, 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 blah. In your industry in particular, Black women catch it. I mean, so much talent, so much creativity, and also so much resistance and so much.
Go there, huh, Van?
What?
I said, you gonna go there, huh, Van?
Oh, I'm gonna go there. I will go there 100%. I got Andrew Day on my thing. Shoot, make him edit it. but what would you want now for people who say, okay, now I'm beginning to get it. Racism is real. This is terrible. What kind of allyship do you think would be helpful and useful to people who are in your industry and who are in your world? What would be good for folks to think about doing and not doing?
Doing and not doing. I think, first of all, yes, allyship is of supreme importance. And I saw something that Chris Cuomo said the other day where he was talking about if we are the majority, then the responsibility is truly on us to make the change in our own communities, in our own dialogue, in our own. And so I think one of the very first things that they can start to do is really question why they think the things that they do. Because I think people forget that, racism, systemic racism, and institutionalized racism, racial injustice and oppression is a network. It's a network of things happening at the same time in order to make you think the way you think, for me to think the way I think. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You know what I mean? You can't only control the thoughts of the people being oppressed. You have to control the thoughts of the oppressor, whether they're aware of it or not. So I think one of the first things they can do is really start to question and undo some of the things they think about people of color in this nation, about Black people in this nation. Why are you so quick to believe that when during a riot or during protest, when you see Black people running out of a store, they're looting, but when you see a white person doing it, maybe they're an employee there? Like, why do you have such an ingrained mistrust of us? I think that's an important part of it as well. And I also think, to understand, instead of just looking at, what's on the news and what's being reported about what's happening in some of our neighborhoods, and something that, understand the root of these things. When people don't have, when they've been oppressed, when they've been suppressed is really the better way to say it. You get desperate. You know what I mean? You're just, when you're trying to survive, you get desperate. And oftentimes they have no frame of reference for that. You know what I mean? And so I think that, I think it has to be a holistic approach. They have to affect the elections as well, too. They have to be able to say, one of the things I was talking about the other day was like, having a desire for change is different than having a commitment to change. Are you willing to go to your election and vote for someone you wouldn't typically vote for because they align with racial justice and equality in this country? Are you willing to have a conversation about changing the national anthem? That third voice in the national anthem is problematic for us and for a lot of people, and that's foundational. Are you willing to even admit that we have a problem? I said the other day, there's no sobriety for an alcoholic in denial. So are you willing to take down some of these monuments? Are you willing to change street names? Are you willing to be uncomfortable to affect change? Are you willing to reform the police, the entire justice system? Are you willing to be uncomfortable and to do these things so that you can actually see a nation in the future that is actually equal, where we're all thriving? When we're divided, we know we fall. You know what I mean? And so I think the willingness to be uncomfortable, the willingness to affect elections and to affect the dialogue and the narrative is super important during this time, and not just standing out there marching, but actually, having these conversations in your community and making these changes, like I said, on the micro level. And that's, for me, it's to do things similar to what we're doing in our communities,
Well, listen, we could talk for a very long time, and I hope that we'll be able to talk many, many more times as we go through this process. As a country, I think we are at a tipping point. And if we can't get it right after this, where you're talking about somebody who was literally, that was basically a lynching. That's what a lynching is. You take somebody's life in broad daylight in front of the whole community and terrify and discourage and humiliate a whole people. That's allowed to stand in 2020. I don't know where we are. And also, what are we supposed to tell our kids? Because, he wasn't running. He wasn't talking back. He didn't have a weapon on him, and he still was murdered. So if there's no response this time, I don't know. But I think there can be a response. I think it can be a powerful and positive response. And art and music is going to sustain us through. I want to thank you so much for reaching so deep into those roots and bringing forth the medicine that we need. And I know you got a second song for us that you're going to perform called Remember I Bleed, which everybody's excited to hear. So I'm going to step out of the way and turn it over to you now.